I've previously done a video on damage types, but thanks to constant updates, it's accrued a few inaccuracies. I'll cover all the damage types as they are today, so you know you've got up-to-date information on what to pick and what to skip. I'm the engineer, let's solve a practical problem. Damage types can be grouped into 4 categories: physical, basic element, combination element, and well, other. Almost all of them have an associated status effect which for most types lasts for 6 seconds. How much of each status you can apply varies depending on both the type and the nature of the enemy you're fighting. Let's start with physical damage. The physical damage types, impact, slash and puncture, are innately on most weapons. If a physical type is not present in a weapon's damage, then you normally can't mod that type of damage in. There are a few exceptions, mainly in mods, stances or abilities which can force slash status effects, but otherwise a weapon only gets the physical damage it starts with. Physical damage mods like Crash Course will increase only the portion of your damage that is already the matching type. Like here on the Fullman, you can see it increases the impact damage by 120%, while having no bonus on nor bonus from the electric damage of the semi-automatic mode. Because of this, most physical damage mods are not worth using most of the time, as you only get a fraction of the benefit compared to elemental options. Impact as a damage type is loosely associated as being the shield breaking damage type, due to having bonuses against both types of enemy shields. However, as it has a weakness against both Grineer and Corpus health, it's nothing special. The impact status effect can be applied up to a max of 5 times, with any additional status effects replacing the oldest ones on the target. On applying impact, this will stagger the target if they're not already in a hard animation, such as using an ability. Overguarded enemies will not be staggered. The lingering effects of impact will increase the mercy threshold on eligible heavy units, raising the remaining health to be open to mercy by 8% per proc. For the Grineer and Infested, this means you can raise the threshold from a 40% minimum to 80% maximum, while Corpus can be raised from 60% to 100% of health, though you still need to break their shields first. Enemies that cannot be mercy killed suffer no direct effect from impact after the initial stagger. Puncture as a damage type is loosely associated as being the armor piercing damage type, due to having bonuses against all 3 armor types, but a significant reduction against shields. For all damage modifiers, a bonus against armor means the damage is increased by the bonus amount, and the enemy is treated as having their armor reduced by that amount for resistance purposes. So for Puncture versus Ferrite, Puncture immediately deals 50% more damage, and is then reduced by only half the enemy's armor value. The Puncture status effect can be applied up to 5 times, and has 2 properties. The first, it reduces the enemy's damage by 40% on the first effect. With additional stacks, reduce the enemy damage a further 10% to a max of 80% reduction. While helpful for your own survival in harder missions, you usually won't find the time to specifically cover and keep covering enemies in Puncture effects. It's usually better just to kill them. The second effect increases the critical chance of attacks against the target by 5% per effect, up to a max of 25%. The increase is an absolute value after all mods, so if you had 5 puncture effects on the enemy for the full 25% bonus, and a weapon with a 7% critical chance normally, then your hits on that enemy will instead have a 32% critical chance. As it's a fixed value, it has a greater real effect when combined with weapons with lower critical chance and higher critical damage. That said, the effect is limited. If you have 100% or higher critical chance, each puncture effect will always give you less than a 5% damage bonus, falling yet lower with higher critical chance still. If your critical chance is below 100%, then puncture procs may be more effective, but only if your weapon has high critical damage and low critical chance. Very few weapons fit this bill, like the Kuvanu core, and the best candidates lack any puncture damage themselves. Basically, the puncture effect for more critical chance does have an effect, but that effect is sorely limited. If puncture happens on an enemy, then you can enjoy the bonus, but trying to force more puncture effects will usually come at the cost of some other, stronger damage source. Lastly of the physical types, we have Slash. On the surface, Slash comes across as the flesh-rending type, having bonuses against all biological health, but weak against armor and corpus robotics. While these bonuses are real, Slash is rarely considered for its damage type. Instead, it's coveted for its status effect. Slash is the only physical status effect to deal damage, applying a fraction of your weapon damage every second, though ignoring any elemental or physical mods you may have used. While the damage is only a fraction of your weapon's potential, the damage from the effect is not slash damage, but instead a typeless damage, often referred to as true damage. This has the unique effect of bypassing armor entirely. Given enemies at higher levels can have armor providing easily over 95% damage reduction, being able to avoid all that armor is a huge boon for damage. Also, unlike Impact and Puncture, Slash has no cap on the number of active status effects on a target, allowing you to continuously deliver more slash effects and inflicting death by 1,000 cuts. I've covered the equation for calculating slash status damage in a previous video, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already, so I'll save us going over it in detail right now. The only other important thing to know about slash effects is that they deal damage every second at the end of the second. With a 6-second duration, this means they'll normally hit 6 times. A 10% increase to your status duration, bringing you to 6.6 seconds, will give you no additional hits, while even a 1% reduction to your status duration, bringing you to 5.94 seconds, will cost you that 6th hit. Moving on from the physical types, we can break into the basic elements. Basic elements are occasionally innate to a weapon, but mostly need to be added in through the use of mods or abilities. As all 4 basic elements can combine with one another to form combination elements, you can only ever have one basic element damage type on a specific attack. There are a couple ways of having a second and different basic elemental hit, such as with Saren's Toxic Lash, but that's specifically a different hit. Unlike physical damage, mods and buffs for basic elements will take your entire weapon damage into account, including any innate physical and elemental damage of different types. Because of this, a 90% or even 60% basic elemental mod will usually apply a stronger bonus than a 120% physical mod. So let's look at the individual types. Heat damage is loosely associated with wiping out the weaker units, having bonuses against biological Grineer and weaker infested, but a penalty against stronger corpus shields. That said, just like with Slash, Heat is more going for it through the status effect. On applying a heat status, most enemies will panic and thrash around as they burn. In addition to this, Heat has 2 ongoing effects. The first is that it reduces the target's armor over the course of 2 seconds down to 50%. This is multiplicative with all other armor reduction options. The armor reduction will remain in full power while Heat remains on the target, with armor returning to normal over 2 seconds when the effect expires. The second effect from Heat is a damage over time effect, hitting every second at the end of each second, just like Slash. Unlike Slash, Heat has a higher multiplier and is also boosted by equipped heat bonuses to the attack, but it doesn't bypass all of an enemy's armor. Heat has the unique property of inheritance as well. When the first heat effect is applied to an enemy, this also locks in the heat bonuses from whatever weapon or source the heat effect came from. All other heat effects applied after the first, but before the heat runs out, will inherit this bonus rather than using their own. So if you apply heat to an enemy using a weapon with a 90% heat mod, then with an ability that delivers a heat effect, the ability will also gain the 90% bonus. Done the other way around, applying the ability effect first and then a weapon status effect, the damage over time from the weapon will not use its 90% heat bonus despite applying it to the direct hit. In addition to this bonus inheritance, older heat procs inherit the duration of newly applied heat procs, allowing them to stack up indefinitely until all run out at once. No other status effect is self-sustaining in this way. All of this allows Heat to scale up to a lot of damage while undermining enemy armor. Next of the basic elements is Cold. Cold damage is a bit of a mixed bag, having a bonus against weaker corpus shields, stronger Grineer armor, and stronger infested armor, yet a penalty against most infested units. As a damage type, it's not largely useful. As a status effect, Cold applies 2 effects. The first is a slowing effect, slowing down everything the enemy does as if time itself ran more slowly for them. This comes with a maximum of 9 status effects, applying a 50% slow on the first effect and a further 5% slow for each additional effect, to a max of a 90% slow. Uniquely, Cold statuses are capped against enemies with Overguard to just 4 effects, for a max slow of 65%. This slow effect can be helpful for preventing enemies from getting to objectives, making them less threatening with slower and more telegraphed attacks, and for setting them up for easier attacks on weak points like headshots. The second effect of Cold is a critical damage enhancement. The first Cold status effect will boost the critical damage of attacks on the target by 0.1 times as an absolute value after all mods. If your critical multiplier will be 2 times, then this makes it 2.1 times. If you have a 10 times, it becomes 10.1 times. As a result, the bonus is more effective on weapons with a weaker critical hit. Additional cold effects add an extra 0.05 times to the critical multiplier, climbing to a max of 0.5 times against normal enemies, or just 0.25 times against enemies with overguard. This bonus is incredibly weak. On a very poor critical weapon with a 1.5 times multiplier, the first cold effect would increase your damage by 6%, with the max effect being a 33% damage increase at 100% critical chance. A critical focused weapon with a 5 times multiplier would only get between 2% and 10% damage bonus at 100% critical chance. With higher critical chance, the effect scales up ever so slightly, but the likelihood of having such a high critical chance with a low critical damage is rare and frankly wasteful. Cold is far more important and useful in upcoming combination elements for damage purposes, so the main use for cold should be for the slowing effect. The third basic element is electric. This damage type is associated as being the anti-machine type, having a bonus both against the rather uncommon Grineer machinery, as well as against Corpus robotics. It also has a significant debuff against alloy armor, which many robotic or machinery-based enemies are coated in, more than undoing the bonus. Where electric can shine is in its status effect. Similar to heat, on applying electric effect, enemies will be stunned in an electrocuted position for a few seconds. This will only apply if the enemy is not overguarded or in the middle of a hard animation. Also like heat, electric has no limit on the number of applied effects and will deal damage over time. However, rather than reducing armor and using the inheritance that heat does, electric will deal damage in an AoE, affecting both the target enemy and all others within 3 meters. If you can group up enemies tightly, this can be a significant uptick in damage. On top of this, electric status damage hits every second at the start of the second, meaning the first hit will land instantly on applying the status effect. While it still has the normal 6-second duration of most status effects, a slight reduction in status duration will not lose you any damage, while even a tiny increase will deal an additional tick of damage. Electric effects are more valuable than heat when dealing with clustered, weaker, unarmored enemies. Last of the basic elements is Toxin. This is classically the Corpus killer, as Toxin damage completely bypasses all normal shields and overshields. Some shields can prevent this, such as the Corpus Treasurer or the shields on the Warframe Hildrin when she has overshields, but mostly it's a total bypass. Even accounting for the damage reduction against Corpus robotic health, bypassing their shields is still a net positive almost always. Against a Grineer infested, Toxin has no bonus and is even weak to use against certain units, but isn't overall too debuffed. As a general direct damage type, Toxin is reliable. This reliability continues into the Toxin status effect. It has no special on-hit effects or strange additional features. Instead, simply enough, Toxin status will deal Toxin damage over time to the target enemy, boosted by Toxin mods. That's all it does, damage over time, and again, bypassing shields because it is Toxin. Heat and Slash are superior for armoured enemies, and Electric will get more work done in clusters of unarmoured enemies, leaving Toxin as just a reliable individual takedown. With the basic elements out of the way, we come on to the biggest group, the combination elements. Each combination element is composed of 2 basic elements. Despite this, none of the effects or modifiers of the basic element carry over. The combination element is its own unique thing. A select number of weapons have innate combination element damage. Where that happens, you can apply a basic element to the weapon to go alongside the combination element, even if that basic element is one of the 2 components of the combination element itself. However, if you are adding combination element to a weapon by using 2 basic elements, all sources of the basic elements on that hit will be rolled into the combination element, including modded bonuses, innate types, and bonuses from Warframe abilities. For a more detailed look into how elements combine, I'll link the full guide to exactly that in the video description. Let's start with Blast, the combination element formed from heat and cold. Blast is strong against only Grineer machinery, which isn't common, and fossilized infested, used only by a handful of infested, with many of them armoured. It's also weak against ferrite armour, which is common, and against infested sinew armour. As a damage type, Blast is overall lackluster. Its status effect is somehow much worse. Blast can be applied for a maximum of 10 stacks, applying an inaccuracy effect to the enemy. This reduces their accuracy by 30% on the first effect, and a further 5% per additional effect up to 75% in accuracy. Considering every other damage type you could be doing, including burning enemies, destroying their armor, slowing them, increasing damage against them, or outright killing them, it's hard to justify taking the time to reduce the target's accuracy for 6 seconds. Moving on then, we can combine heat and toxin to get gas. Gas damage is mainly an infestation cleanser, having a significant bonus against most infested health, while having a debuff against all biological corpus and Grineer. Given that most infested units are something of a pushover without armor, this isn't much of a win. The gas status effect is then a curious one. Similar to electric, and despite having no electric in it, gas status creates an AoE cloud of damage centered on the target. This will damage all nearby enemies in a radius starting at 3 meters, rising to about 6 meters with additional status effects up to 10. This 10 status limit is where the problems begin. No other damaging status effect has such a limit, but gas will cap out. The 11th effect applied will remove the first one. If your 11th hit is weaker than the first, such as replacing a crit with a non-crit, this actually means your damage goes down. Even if that doesn't happen, you cannot scale beyond 10 effects per target, and the damage scaling for gas effects does not take into account your weapon bonuses to heat or toxin. In making gas, you give up heat armor reduction, duration inheritance and panic effect, you give up toxin shield bypass effect, and you give up both heat and toxin's respective mod bonuses to your damage, all in exchange for a soft capped cloud of gas. As a result, gas is most useful as a status effect when grouping up enemies without armor, and then only on a stronger weapon applying a medium amount of status procs. Rapid fire effects will just be a waste, and too few effects will have lower range, all while being weak against the stronger 2 main factions. The third way to combine heat is with electric, forming radiation. Radiation as a damage type is very effective against alloy armor, used by many hardier Grineer and boss units from multiple factions, giving it a strong place for use as a direct damage type. It is, however, weak against many infested, and should certainly not be used against the infested on the Cambion Drift, unless you intend to handicap yourself. Radiation status effect is a little more complicated. On receiving a radiation status effect, the target will become capable of friendly fire. Both player and NPC can suffer this. What's more, an irradiated player will be unable to help allies such as reviving them, while an irradiated NPC will become confused, forgetting friend from foe and gaining a 100% damage bonus against their allies. With additional stacks, this bonus increases by 50% to a max of 550% extra damage against its allies with 10 stacks. Once radiation expires, all is forgiven among NPCs as they rejoin their brothers in fighting you. No such forgiveness is guaranteed from fellow players if you backstab them. Unlike most status effects, radiation has a base duration of 12 seconds rather than 6, amplifying the overall effect. While enemies are pretty poor at shooting each other in terms of damage, having enemies turn on one another can be a great defensive tool, taking the threat away from you or your objective. On the flip side, this is a terrible thing if you're trying to be stealthy, as irradiated enemies will absolutely cause havoc, and you can be caught in a crossfire, even if undetected. For balance purposes, this status has a reduced effect against many enemies. Most boss or boss-like enemies, including enemies with overguard, will not be tricked so easily. Bosses and overguarded enemies affected by radiation will still be considered friendly by their allies, and will not shoot their allies. However, they will open fire on unprotected allies affected by radiation. For boss enemies, the radiation effect on them will instead increase the damage they receive from confused allies, rather than increase the damage they would deal to allies. The next combination element is magnetic, formed from cold and electric. Magnetic is the damage of choice for dealing with corpus shields, boasting a 75% bonus against all corpus shields. It otherwise lacks any other damage bonus, and has a serious penalty against alloy armor. The status effect of magnetic doubles down on this design. The first effect on an enemy will increase all damage done to its shields by 100%, and a further 25% for each additional effect up to the max of 10 stacks, for a 325% damage bonus. This is a multiplier to all incoming damage, including further hits of magnetic damage. The downsides though should be obvious. Firstly, there's the earlier damage type Toxin, which bypasses shields entirely, getting no bonus from magnetic. Secondly, every enemy that doesn't have shields is functionally immune to the magnetic effect. It's still really potent against highly shielded enemies, especially those with enhanced shields like the Corpus Treasurer, but is otherwise poor to wield. Against players, magnetic has an enhanced effect. A player hit by magnetic will have their UI scrambled for the duration, and will lose 20 energy per second from the effect. Anything that cleanses you of status effects will halt the energy drain and shield damage bonuses, but the UI effect will still run its course. Similar to magnetic, we then have viral, which is composed of toxin and cold. Viral damage has a bonus against biological Grineer and biological corpus health, while it has a debuff against the weakest infested and Grineer machinery. Viral is also one of the most commonly resisted types outside of the normal damage modifiers, with especially infested units in some locations being immune to either viral status effects, viral damage, or even both. The viral status effect then is the health counterpart to magnetic against shields. Viral increases the damage done to health by 100% on the first effect, and 25% more for each extra effect up to the cap of 10 stacks, for a 325% damage bonus. Unlike magnetic, viral is beneficial against all factions, as everything has health, and everything dies only when that health is reduced to 0, one way or another. The only real downside to viral is how much it locks you out of. Formed from cold and toxin, this restricts your ability to use cold, toxin, magnetic, blast, gas, or corrosive alongside the viral effect. Heat, electric, radiation, and physical types are perfectly usable alongside viral, however. So finally of the combined elements is corrosive, made from toxin and electric. Corrosive damage has a powerful bonus against both ferrite armor and fossilized health, making it a great damage type for a large number of hardier enemies. It only has one weakness too, against the shields of stronger corpus units. This downside is made worse by the difficulty in getting toxin and corrosive on the same weapon, but then that's why we can bring multiple weapons. As for the status effect, corrosive reduces the armor of the target. The first effect will reduce the armor instantly by 26%, and then a further 6% for each additional stack up to the max of 10 for an 80% armor reduction. This is multiplicative with other armor reductions. Also uniquely, corrosive status effects have a duration of 8 seconds rather than the usual 6. While it's mostly Grineer that are armoured, there are some corpus and infested armoured units which can be debuffed by this effect too. Broadly then, the combination elements are mixed, with blast being terrible, gas and magnetic very situational, radiation somewhat situational, but corrosive and viral are widely and strongly effective in each their own way. The final few damage types are the more exotic ones which don't have a category themselves. True damage, mentioned earlier as the damage type used by slash status effects, is more accurately referred to as Typeless. It has no positives nor negatives against anything, with the exception of ignoring all armor, but not other damage reduction effects. It can be found in front, back and stealth finishes, slash status effects, and some abilities like desiccation. You don't mod for true damage, it just happens when eligible. Void damage is a non-elemental damage type available from a very limited number of sources, primarily the operator or drifter amps. It, like true damage, has no bonus against any health, shield or armor type, but it does have a 50% damage bonus against overguard, while nothing else does. Unlike true damage, Void has a status effect bullet attractor. This doesn't show as a status effect on the status bar of a target, but it does create a transparent bubble around the enemy, drawing in any weapons fire that would intersect with the bubble to hit the enemy. Think of it like a kind of aim assist. Then there is Tau damage, a damage type exclusive to the Sentient faction. We know very little about this damage type, how they came to develop it, or what it really represents. All we know is that we can resist it, and it has no discernible status effect. Lastly of damage types are the Railjack damage types. These use the same base types as the physical, basic elements and combination elements, but with different status effects. In truth, you can ignore the details of those types. Far more important in Railjack is the type of weapon you're using and how quickly it kills enemies in general. Due to the lack of weapon modding, you can't readily select for ideal damage types, leaving you free to skip that whole train of thought. I'm doing you a favour here, you don't need to think about it. Alright, that wraps it up on damage and status effects in Warframe as they exist in 2023. I hope you found this video helpful, and remember to subscribe to catch more as it goes live. And as always, land damage, proc status, and fight well, Tenno.